Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 42. Damage Control. First order of business was tending to their injuries. They moved to the kitchen because it had plenty of space, water, food, and everything else they needed to regroup, so to speak, and also because Loki did not want everyone to bleed all over their room. Since Stark was the least injured of their company, he was the one who hauled a frankly excessive amount of medical supplies in. "Can I, make the elixir for you?" he asked, eyeing Loki's hands with the same horrified expression he wore on his face since he first laid eyes on them. "No, you've never tried to make one before, and it's unnecessary," Loki told him. His hands and arms were burning with pain, but it was something that would heal without a problem. "You need to heal your arms," Stark said. "It will heal on its own in a matter of days," Loki answered. "I just need you to bring me the ointment from the top shelf, light green jar." "Why would you wait a few days?" "Stark, the elixir is for severe wounds." "You made me drink it when I was a little beat up," Stark argued. "You have third-degree burns on both arms." "You're mortal! Even smaller wounds take weeks to heal. I will be fine in a few days. Stop arguing with me. Just bring the bloody ointment!" Stark stared at him for a moment, then turned and left the room without a word. "He's just worried, you know?" "You said." "Yes, thank you! I'm aware of that!" Loki snapped. "We need to set the bones in your arm to you," Drongo interrupted before she could open her mouth to reply. "Have you ever done anything like this before?" Loki asked him. "I'm no healer," he answered, "but I'll manage." Loki nodded and let him get to it. It's not like it was a complicated task. He could check it in a few days himself after his hands healed. Yu seemed to be fine with letting the giant treat her wounds. Bee was sitting quietly in a chair next to her sister, only slightly wounded and completely calm. Drongo did a good job with her. Drongo was altogether a valuable addition to their crew. When he lost all contact with Stark and the others, he was torn between continuing his task and investigating the problem. In the end, he remained by the generator in hope that Stark would be capable of handling the situation. He was still wary and very much aware that their defenses had been breached. It did not matter that he had found a suitable, albeit painful, way of reaching the energy in the generators when he did not know the full extent of the danger they were in. He was just about to leave the generator room when Drongo showed up. The giant explained what he knew about their situation swiftly and told him about his encounter with the invaders. It was not hard to fabricate a plan after he had someone to execute some parts of it. They found a way to reestablish lighting and communications. After that, Drongo could leave to find the others while Loki headed back to the generator. His escape plan was simple, but it required everyone on the ship he wanted to pull along with his spell to not touch anyone unwanted. Drongo had the task of reassuring that. It was not easy to map out the full ship and wrap it in his power, but it was surprisingly simple to separate the others from the hostile life forms. He got more severely wounded for less in the past, so he really could not complain about the burns. His mind was clear and he was not significantly weakened. More importantly, everyone was alive and relatively hale. Their escape was a success. He could, of course, still understand where Stark's ire was coming from. He saw injuries differently. Indeed, the amount of tissue damage he had would surely scar a mortal for life. Maybe the delicate muscles and sinews would be unable to heal completely at all. For someone like Stark, who worked with his hands, it must have been a terrifying prospect. Nonetheless, he had to learn that what counted as a severe injury for a mortal was only light damage for someone like Loki. Yes, it hurt, and it did not look well, but it would heal in a matter of days, so he did not need coddling. Stark returned with the ointment Loki asked for, his brows still furrowed and his shoulders still tense, though. He looked at Loki questioningly while he held up the jar, and while he would have been perfectly capable of applying the balm on his own, Loki held out his hands. Stark pulled a chair closer and sat down right in front of him, unscrewing the cap. "I know you're humoring me, you know," he said as he gathered some of the salve in his hand and reached out carefully to smear it on the burns, first on Loki's right hand and arm. "Then at least you know how perfectly fine I am, since I am indeed humoring you," Loki answered. "You know I have no patience for sentimentalities when I am truly injured." Stark huffed out a breath and focused on the task at hand. At least his shoulders relaxed a bit, even if he was still frowning and squinting a bit. "Are you well?" Loki asked with a frown of his own. "Yes, I already told you," the man answered. "No, you're squinting. You have a headache." It was meant to be a statement, but it came out slightly as an accusation. "I hate it that you're observant," Stark sighed. "DNI?" Loki asked while Stark moved on to his other arm. The man nodded. "Yeah, the system shut down mid-use, so it gave me backlash," he said. "How bad?" Loki asked. "Manageable," Stark answered. Who was being stubborn about injuries now? "On a scale of 1 to 10? He asked pointedly. Stark sighed again. "I'm fine." "Humor me, Stark," Loki said. It was only fair. "I don't know. 5, 6. He shrugged. "That's bad enough," Loki told him. "Any bleeding? Nose, ears, mouth?" Stark stopped what he was doing and looked up at him. "No, and I'm okay. This is not something that happens every day, so it's nothing to worry about. I just had my whole attention focused on the system, so I was deep in. That's why it hurt when I got cut off." "We are going to continue your mental training. No more excuses," Loki told him sternly. "I know, I'm not an idiot." "Only sometimes." "Well, so are you," Stark countered. "As entertaining as it is to listen to you two," Drongo interrupted. He was wrapping up Chuyu's arm now. "We have some other more pressing issues to discuss." Stark looked up at them and frowned again. "Shouldn't we, make an elixir for Chuyu?" he asked. "I'd rather not experiment on her," Loki told him. "There are more similarities than differences between Aesir and human physiology, so while there was a risk, your body reacted favorably. She's reptilian, everything is different, right down to her very cells, so I have absolutely no idea how she would react to it." "Don't worry about it," Chuyu said then. "It's gonna be fine in a week or so." "Damn, I'm the only one who heals slowly. That sucks," Stark grumbled. "It would also take my body to heal broken bones more than a week," Drongo told him, "although it is quite hard to break any bone in me to begin with." "That actually makes me feel better." Stark smiled as he got some gauze bandages for Loki's hands. "But not that much better. It's like I'm the loser in the evolution game." "Do not be so hard on yourself," Drongo said pleasantly, while he started cleaning out his own wounds, starting with the slashes on his forearms. "Skrulls are, after all, the result of centuries of genetic experiments." "I did not know that," Stark said. "It is also the reason why they are still exactly the same as they were millions of years ago. They do not evolve anymore." "I did not know that," Chuyu said. "Well, you did not grow up among Skrulls, I assume," Drongo said. "You would hardly be so far away from your kind if that wasn't the case." "You know a lot about Skrulls?" Loki asked while Stark started bandaging his hands. "I know a little about a lot of things," Drongo said. "But the Skrulls are rather important if one monitors the Andromeda, so I learned a bit more about them." "We did not really run into Skrulls," Stark said, "well, besides the girls." "You were lucky then," Drongo said. "The only reason why I mentioned it in the first place is because it is a mistake to compare the Skrulls to other reptilians. Their genetic pool is quite unique, one might say. I know not of any other race that can change their shapes so effortlessly, and to such an extent, for example. It is fascinating, of course. How can they mentally cause the unstable molecules that comprise their bodies to become pliant, assume other forms through muscular expansion and contraction, yet let that form be organic or inorganic? I do not know if there is any other race capable of such things." "Unstable molecules?" Stark asked. Drongo chuckled. "Again, as entertaining and interesting as it is to discuss such things, we have other matters to talk about." "For example, I'd like to know what it was that almost got us all killed," Chuyu said, her arm perfectly bandaged. Now she only needed to put it in a sling. "I am very curious about that as well," Loki agreed. Stark huffed. Yeah, and like I said, I have no idea. We were in a bit of a tight spot when I grabbed the discs randomly. And we have a lot, so I started to look them over. But after I found some maps that were good for us, I stopped. I had other things to do rather than looking over a bunch of maps we have no use for. Well, obviously, there is something very important on one of those discs, Loki told him. So we need to look them over properly. Yeah, I know, Stark said. But we need to get all systems back and running first. I have to know the extent of the damage in the ship. Those friggin' pods obviously got their way inside. The engines were still down. I don't know how much energy there is left in the generators, and oh yeah, we don't know where we are. I do believe that the ship will be able to recognize our location based on the visible constellations around us. Well, if the ship has any suitable maps for this location. One more reason to look over every disk. We need to enter every map we have into the database. Loki agreed. You guys do realize that if we have no map for this area, we're in trouble. Stark commented idly as he finished wrapping up Loki's arms. We will be forced to move with minimum speed. We don't know which way the closest star is or a suitable planet where we can get the rest of the repairs done. If we run out of energy before we reach something, let us worry about that once we got everything back online and the maps added, Loki said. We can worry about the energy, our sources, and provisions after that. It would be, of course, wise to run on bare minimum until then, Drongo suggested. No need to waste energy. Maybe we will need everything there is. Okay, Stark nodded as he stood up. We're gonna shut down everything that's not strictly necessary then. We search the ship, assess the damage, then we get onto those stupid discs. And that's another map, Stark said as he activated yet another disc. Loki, Stark, and Drongo gathered on the bridge after they were done with the most pressing tasks. Stark managed to convince the girls to rest. Well, he only wanted Julia to rest because she needed it, but Bee joined her, which was fine since she was unlikely to contribute to the upcoming discussions. They still did not know the full extent of the damage done to the ship, but it was safe to say that they were going to be able to travel. At least for a while. The pod that cut its way into the ship was still attached to them securely, so while it was definitely not optimal, they could leave it there for the time being. They needed to land the ship somewhere in order to repair that. The generators were not emptied, of course. Loki knew that he did not take that much, but it was still better to be on the side of caution. They closed up and locked down every room they did not need and limited the lights and heating to the areas they actually used. Stark did not power up his workshop again, either. They actually closed up the whole cargo hold after bringing in everything they may need later, like Stark's armor, food, clothing, medical supplies, and so on. They also only left light support, basic defense, and the main control systems running. Secondary systems were also shut down in order to preserve energy. Now Stark was opening up one disc after another to find whatever it was that Aesir and his soldiers wanted. So far, they only found maps, which were promptly added to the ship's database as planned. Oh, that's not a map, Stark said, and Loki turned to pay attention to the displays again. What is that? He asked as he looked at it. The circular design looked complicated, and it exceeded his current technological knowledge. Why couldn't they just all use magic like sensible beings? It was such a pain. I'm not really sure it's what I think it is, Stark said as his eyes were focused on the images before him. I mean, I have 3 different ideas, actually. It's a warp drive, Drongo said after a long moment of staring. Stark made a tiny and high aborted noise. It sounded utterly undignified, but also managed to tell Loki a lot right away. There were not many things that made Stark that excited. No way, Stark said, staring at the plans. I mean, is that like a thing that exists? Like, it was already invented and it's in use? The Skrulls have the technology. Drongo nodded. A few other races as well. What does it do? Loki asked. A warp drive in theory. Stark started, then he looked at the displays again. Well, not in theory, but in reality, because I am looking at actual blueprints here. Wow, okay. So a warp drive is a faster-than-light propulsion system. Use simple terms, Stark, Loki reminded him.
It creates an artificial bubble or a field of normal space-time that surrounds the ship so that we can accelerate.
Drongo said before Stark could speak again. Stark turned and looked at the giant silently for a moment.
Yes?
Drongo asked. I would not have expected for something like that to come out of your mouth after all the hippie crap I've been hearing, Stark said.
Thank you, I think.
Drongo replied evenly. Stark turned back to Loki. Okay, so normally you cannot travel faster than light, he said. In theory, a particle with subluminal velocity would need infinite energy to accelerate to the speed of light. And the man continued. Which would be pretty darn impossible to accomplish, but in the case of an actual working warp drive, we would be exceeding the speed of light within our local frame of reference. No need for infinite energy, just the same we use for normal flight. The ship would cross distances by contracting space in front of it and expanding space behind it, so we would be traveling faster than light. Loki raised an eyebrow.
In simple terms,
Drongo added,
we cannot accelerate to the speed of light within normal space-time, but the warp drive generates a field that shifts the space around the ship. This way we can arrive at our destination faster than light would in normal space. He finished, without needing an infinite energy, like Stark said.
I'm really starting to like you, big man, Stark said, pointing a finger at Drongo. He looked back at Loki. I could write down the math for it, but I'm not sure it would help. No, I understand well enough, Loki told him. It sounds like something very valuable.
It is, even in the Andromeda,
Drongo said.
Like I said, the Skrulls and their allies use the technology furthermost. They are almost the only ones who can reach great distances without having to travel for years. As you can imagine, there are many other races who would love to have this advantage as well.
It certainly is useful for trade or war, Loki guessed. Yeah, you kind of lose the element of surprise if you have to travel for years to reach a planet, Stark said. The Chitauri did not have this technology, Loki commented absently.
They're supposed to, if they're still in alliance with the Skrulls,
Drongo said. If they were allies, they're not anymore, Loki answered. Could you build this? Stark asked. Not with what I have now, he said. I mean, not with the ship. It's not suitable for it. But it's still a very valuable technology, Loki concluded. Definitely reason enough to hunt us down all the way from the Andromeda, Stark agreed.
It would be wise to keep it a secret that we have it in our possession,
Drongo told them. I agree, Loki nodded. Yeah, no kidding. Stark agreed too and closed the displays. There are too many would-be conquerors who are only limited by distance. Stark did not need to elaborate for Loki to know who he was referring to. If the Chitauri were still in alliance with the Skrulls, like Drongo said, then they would have been able to reach Midgard without the help of Loki and the Tesseract. He knew Thanos had other reasons for wanting the Tesseract, of course, not just for its ability to open up portals, but it was still very likely that he did not have faster-than-light ships at his disposal. The Skrull Empire was powerful. They would never bow to Thanos, and so they would not hand over their valuable technology to him either. But Thanos couldn't be the only one who wanted such technology. The question is whether Aesir wanted this for himself, he said out loud, or if he had someone pulling his strings. Either way, they didn't get it, Stark said. So if it was not for Spike himself, then we pissed off someone very much, but that's nothing new.
Offering up such a technology could also be a valuable bargaining chip,
Drongo said.
Maybe Aesir wanted to win someone's favor. He did hate the Skrulls, and he sounded like an ambitious man.
It's useless to theorize, Loki said. We do not know, and maybe we won't ever know. The fact is that we have it in our possession, so while it's useful and valuable, it may also cause trouble. And we cannot let it end up in the wrong hands, Stark added. So not a word to anyone then. Hopefully whoever were Aesir's allies, they lost our track when we teleported. You do plan to build one though, right? Loki asked. Once we're back on Midgard? Of course I am, Stark said. There are too many big and scary things out there that my tiny vulnerable planet is not ready for. I'm going to need every piece of advanced technology I can get my hands on if I want to protect it. That is your long-term plan? Loki asked. Gather technology to protect Midgard? It's my planet, Stark said simply but with fierce conviction. "Nobody's going to mess with my planet, not on my watch. Anyone decides to give it a go to conquer it again, I'm going to take it personally. I will be better prepared than last time, and they're going to regret they ever set foot on Earth." "You and your hedonism." Loki shook his head. He still smiled fondly because the determined glint in Stark's eyes was really quite something to behold.
"Defending you and yours is not the mark of a hero,"
Drongo said.
"It is perhaps the most selfish desire there is, but it is still one of the noblest ones."
"See," Stark grinned, "not heroic nonsense," he said. "I have a purely selfish motivation, kicking the ass of those who try to take something that's mine." "Well, if you put it like that," Loki smiled, "I cannot really argue."
"Before we fabricate more plans for the distant future, maybe we could continue figuring out where we are,"
Drongo said then. "Yes, first things first. I can't kick anyone's butt if I'm not there." Stark agreed and turned back to open up new discs one after another. Selfish motivation, albeit a noble one. It was certainly true for Stark. Loki had no desire to become a self-proclaimed protector of Midgard of all realms, but it certainly seemed like that would be their home base once they reached the planet. It was Stark's home. He had his wealth and his inventions, his kingdom, so to speak. He had no reason to protect Midgard, but he did have an invested interest in preventing Stark from a stupid heroic death. That could be his selfish motivation. Stark wanted to protect what was his, so Loki was going to do the same.